I'm Steve Drysdale. I was the executive director of the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver from its inception in 1986 until 1992. I was a Federation director shortly after I had been a Jewish Community Center director in Tennessee. And as a result of doing both, I chose to continue a career in the Federation, which I did after that in Akron, Ohio. And then I spent 2 years in France working for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And it was from France that I came to Vancouver. Because there was a new federation starting up here. It was actually not formed yet, and it was a very challenging position to think about. And I came out to Vancouver. I had a couple of options, so I came to Vancouver, and the people here were just very welcoming and wined and dined me, and seemed like a great place to live. So we chose to come to Vancouver. A construction of the Federation was really premised on the fact that prior to that, the community affairs were quite substantially run out of Toronto by the UJA. And there was a local organization called the Funding Council, which got some money from that UJA campaign to give to some local agencies. But they were dependent on that UJA campaign and didn't have any input really much into the campaign itself. There were disparate agencies in the community that didn't have an umbrella. The community was growing at that point. What had been a kind of core community of 5,000 people had already grown to 12 to 18,000 people. Nobody was really sure at the time. There was a growing community in Richmond at the time. And while the core community was interested in canvassing them for contributions, that had to be accompanied by some services. And up to that point, there had been no services in Richmond. So the first challenge was bringing all those organizations together. That happened between September of 1986 and January of 1987. So in those months, September, October, November, December, I worked with all those various individual agencies to create some kind of working modus operandi that became the Federation. And in January of 1987, that was launched. Ergo, the 30th anniversary in 2017. So, but then all those other challenges came to the fore. Also, in the previous iteration, there was no planning function. There was no body that looked at the community and said, we need this for the elderly, we need this for teens, we need this for young adults, we need this to create a next generation of leadership, we need to expand our Jewish education opportunities, we need to look at Richmond and Berkwest and the North Shore. None of that had happened. There was no place for that to happen. So the Federation created that planning department. The first person who ran that was Gene Gerber, who was really the first employee of the Federation professionally at that time, along with me. And then gradually we added people who ran young adult programs and the campaign itself, and it grew over a period of time. So I was here for 6 years, and there was a lot of change over that time. Well, it's interesting because at the beginning, most Jewish people in Vancouver had no idea what a federation was. So our first chore actually was to create a marketing, if you will, program, a public relations program, so people understood what the Federation was. And so we invested quite a bit of time and money in things like Federation Magazine, which was designed to show the community that the Federation wasn't just about raising money. It wasn't just about raising money for Israel or the local community, but both. That it embraced young leadership, because many of the people who worked on that magazine were the younger people in the community. And that was accompanied by things like the televised Super Sunday, which we did for a number of years at the beginning, where we, through one of the local public stations, we were able to televise Super Sunday. Now, people didn't call in to us, we called out to them, but while that program was going on, people from all the various agencies and the synagogues and the services came on the air and explained what they did, and we had videos that they had produced that we were able to show, and we had a 2 or 3 hour telethon, which also was designed to give people an idea of what the Federation was about, what it did, how it was an umbrella for all these other Jewish organizations. The other thing that was pretty critical was to create an annual allocations process, whereas prior to that, money was given to the Fund and Council by the UJA campaign. Now the campaign was the Federation's campaign. And it had to determine how it was going to divide up the money, not just between Israel and the local community, but within the local community to a bunch of different agencies. That created some tension because whereas at the time there was one day school in Vancouver, the Talmud Torah, there was a push to have another day school in Richmond. There was a lot of controversy about that, in terms of whether the Talmud Torah was going to run it itself or be threatened by it, or whether the Federation was going to give funds to the Richmond Day School in proportion to the per capita amount that it was giving to the Talmud Torah and things like that. So there were politics, there was money, there was establishment versus newcomers. There was a lot of that stuff, and we worked through all that with both the older generation and younger generation of people. That was the other thing I think that we achieved during those years, was bringing together the veteran generation of the community and many young leaders. I've maintained a connection with Vancouver and the Jewish community in Vancouver, and although I'm not up to date day to day, I've kept a connection. I've always kept a conversation going with whoever the executive director was at the time, and have known a little bit about what's going on. I know it's greatly expanded. I know the campaign has greatly advanced. I know that many young people the next generation has essentially taken over the Federation, and the people I worked with, even the people who were considered young leaders then, are no longer young. They're still leaders in some cases, but they're not young, and that's great, because the whole idea of creating a young leadership that would provide some continuity to the community was one of the core missions of the Federation. So the fact that it did that is great. I think that one of the things that also happened in those first couple of years is that we tried to establish Vancouver as solidly the third important community in Canada after Toronto and Montreal. And that happened even during my time, but I think has gotten more and more important over the years. So I don't know all the little details. I think it's gotten more professionalized. We did, during my time, start the foundation. At the time, Helen Coleman and I worked on that and hired the first foundation director at the time. And that has proven to be a very important underpinning of the community as well. So a lot of those building blocks were actually started during those 6 years, and some have continued and been important, and some obviously have, evolved and changed, and that's the nature of things. I think particularly in a relatively new community like Vancouver, I know we're talking about 30 years, but that's still relatively new if you compare it to Montreal or Toronto, especially Montreal. One of the ways you create community is to bring people together to support the community institutions that support them. And under the umbrella of the Federation, that can happen. It obviously requires money, so there is a campaign. It does get people involved. Not everybody's a campaigner, not everybody is a contributor, but everybody benefits from it at the end of the day. There are people who never give a nickel to the Federation who end up in a senior program for years after they're 70 years old. So people benefit even when they don't think they're going to. And sometimes it's people's grandchildren who benefit. So it does benefit the whole community, and the Federation's hardest job is to persuade people that that's the case. Well, I think that the community here also, because of its roots in a more Israel-oriented project, has always been a strong supporter of Israel and continues to be. Not all communities across North America have continued that over the years for various reasons, but Vancouver always was, and Canadian Jewry in general, all the Canadian federations have been strong supporters of Israel. I think that's really important. I think that's important for our young people. I think it's important to understand that the Jewish world is bigger than our own swimming pool, and so I, kol hakavod to Vancouver and its leadership for maintaining that in my, that connection. In my time, the connection was with a town called Kfar Yona, just north of Tel Aviv, and then Canadian Jewry in general adopted the northern part of the country, which I understand Vancouver is now involved in too, and that's terrific. And I think it's instructive to young people that connection is maintained.